I hate networking meetings. I hate cocktail hours. I hate standing around and talking, especially when we're going to talk about ourselves, what we do for a living. And I join business groups and I go to these functions because being an introvert and staying in my house does nothing for my business, let alone being able to help anyone with what I do. So I joined this business group, and another gentleman joined who does similar things to what I do, another executive coach. And we got to talking. And the more I talked to him, the more I gravitated towards him. The more when we had a meeting, I would kind of look for him and go hang out with him and talk to him a little bit more. I found I was really comfortable with him, and it was really, really nice. And as we got to get to know each other a little bit better, I started to get to understand what he does for a living versus what I do for a living, and what he brings to his clients. And after talking for a little while longer, I was like, he's got to be on the podcast because he's got a really good point of view, some really great methodologies. So he is the founder of Agile Growth Partners, Sri Seshadri, because I practice saying his name properly. He is a mid-market. He works with mid-market CEOs and their leadership teams to accelerate business growth and increase enterprise value. He's got over 20 years of experience in top firms, including GE, Capital One, CEB, which is now Gardner. Sri is committed to the growth and development of conscious leaders, cohesive teams, and enduring businesses. The thing that I want to talk to him about today, which I think is really cool, is he created the 5 drivers of agile growth. That's strategic, execution, talent, cash flow, and culture. And we're going to talk about what that actually means in a minute. Sri, thanks for being on the show.
Mark, thank you so very much for having me. From the first time I met you, I thought you were really interesting. And, I then got your book, read that. I thought it was really fascinating, Only Tense. And then, I've been really enjoying our relationship, getting to know you, reading your latest book. Just this morning, I was working with a client and I said, please get a copy of The Rising Leader. It's going to be very important for our work together. So very happy to be on your show today. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I've been in going, when I prepare for a conversation like this, I steep myself in the work of whoever it is, whether it's a CEO and whatever they've contributed, publicly to the world, or if it's a subject matter expert like yourself. And there's so much that lines up in what we talk about. And then there's so much where we diverge. I was joking with someone about, I said, if you need to know how to work on your cash flow and the plumbing of your business, I'm sending you to Sri. If you need to learn how to be the leader of your business, Sri can do that, but that's me. So like I'm gonna take those things on for so the synergy is great. So I'm curious, the name of your company is Agile Growth Partners. You created this agile methodology. What do you mean by agile?
Sure. So the name of the company is coming from this place where I want to partner with businesses who want to be more agile and pursue growth. And so when I talk about agility, it is not, or agile, I'm not using the same context of how it's been used more widely, which is project management. And, they talk about agile project management methodology versus waterfall, which has been, massive in terms of what it's done for how projects are run. But when I talk about agility, I'm talking about the characteristics of somebody who can be highly adaptive, flexible, responsive, nimble, and malleable. And it's in the context of the world that we live in, which has, many people use the term VUCA, which is VUCA, which stands for, very high levels of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, wherein the types of challenges our leaders face and companies face are very different than they did 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Is that a high level way of saying we have no idea what the fuck's going to happen in any given situation?
I think, predicting the future is almost like impossible. So but there are some trends I'll continue. But what's really interesting about this time period, Mark, is just the pace of change is way higher than what we've seen before.
Yeah, while we're talking, Zoom keeps popping up. Would you like an AI assistant? Would you like to try our AI assistant? I'm like, no, I just know how to turn this on and record, so I'm really good. So I'm sure, like in what you're talking about, is in the organizations, AI has got to be a red beacon of what does this mean to us? What does this mean to me? It says if we don't learn it, we'll fall behind. And it really seems to have nothing to do with our business. So how do we focus on what we need to do? So when you go into an organization, what's the first thing you start talking to them about to kind of assess their levels of agility?
Um, so I want to actually kind of step back a little bit and give you some context on the work that I do, right? So in
Please.
terms of what I do most of the time these days, I'm basically a business coach. So I work with CEOs and senior teams of mid-market companies and helping them accelerate growth. And that's where I have my framework called the 5 drivers of agile growth. We are very focused on strategy, execution, culture, cash flow, and talent. So the idea is that if you want to build an enduring business, these are 5 drivers that you have to get right. So you need to have a very clear strategy that gives you a differentiated position in the market. You need to have very disciplined execution that can actually turn that strategy into results. You need to put in place a really effective culture that allows you to kind of attract the best people, retain them, and grow. And you need to always focus on the cash flow. Like cash flow is like oxygen. If when you think about how a lot of companies kind of go bankrupt, which is a very high number in entrepreneurial mid-market space, it's because they're on a cash. And then talent, right, which is all about, do you have the right people in the right seats doing the right things? And are you able to bring in these best people, let them do their best work, and grow with you? Those are the main things that I'm working with clients on. But there's another topic that I'm very drawn to, which is basically agility. This whole idea of like being flexible, adaptive, responsive, and so forth. Because as I've looked at my own life, and I've looked at a lot of the coaching work that I've done with clients over the last 10 years, a theme that has emerged is having a greater sense of agility sets you up for success, especially in the context in the world that we're operating in. Because the opposite of that would be a form of rigidity, right? If you think about a spectrum, on one end you have agility, and another end you have rigidity. And rigidity can work and can get you to a certain level, but quite often leaders find themselves in the place what Marshall Goldsmith described as what got you here won't get you there, right? Rigidity has a downside, which is it can be very constraining, right? It can only work in specific situations, but not necessarily in the environment that we operate in. And so one of the main questions that I'm asking is like, how do we build higher levels of agility in the way people operate? And I just think that there's a lot of different facets to that, right? And we can get into that.
There's so many facets of it, and it goes directly towards what you talked about: the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, and the ambiguity of every day is an adventure. So when you're trying to grow a business with shifting sands, how do you keep yourself disciplined but also ready to change at any given time? So what are the different places where we focus on for our agility?
So when I think about agility, I feel like there's quite a few different domains or facets, if you want to think about it. There is a lot of it kind of begins with, the first thing, physical agility, right? The difference between somebody who is in really good shape versus somebody isn't, that there is a big difference in the agility. I remember watching Limitless on Disney Channel with Chris Hemsworth, right? And beautiful series where he was exploring different parts of like longevity and so forth. And one of the final episodes, he does this experiment wherein they're actually helping him experience aging. So he goes and joins a senior living facility. And as part of that experiment, one of the things that they do is like they basically put some kind of rubber bands around him, which creates more tension and limits the rigidity. So he's just not able to move as easily and, in a nimble way and so forth. These are things that we take for granted when we are younger, but really, you come to appreciate it when you either lose agility for some reason, either because of an injury or as you grow old or like something happens. But, that's one of the most, basic things, right? But then, there's cognitive agility in terms of, our cognition, our thought processes. There's a lot of work that's been done there around biases and so forth, which can really either limit us or really expand our options. There is psychological agility. How can we manage the roller coaster that we experience on a day-to-day basis in terms of positive emotions and negative emotions, and are we able to uh, adapt to it effectively, or do we get thrown off by it? There's communication agility. Are we able to, communicate with a, wide range of people and still be effective, or do we only have a very narrow range that we use that works in one setting but doesn't in many other places? There is relational agility. How can we be in relationship with people and different kinds of people? Again, the main thing here is you cannot use a one size fits all approach, right? Like if there's one key message, I think it would be around that. And same thing applies to leadership agility. Same thing applies to strategic agility. And at the highest levels, you would think about cultural agility, where I do work in Australia and India, and and so forth. I mean, just I think about this. Last month I was in Colombia, Cartagena, Colombia. A couple of weeks ago I was in Canada. Right now I'm in the U.S. and later this month I'll be in India and Australia. Right, so being on 4 continents in like 2 months, being able to be in that kind of global setting and still be effective in these different cultures requires agility, right?
Actually, when you're speaking about that just the way you talk about topics, what the values are in each culture when it comes to leadership, and the way you can speak about things, it makes you have to be completely flexible and agile and adaptive.
Yeah, absolutely. Because what I do in Australia may not work in India, or if I'm in South Africa, that may require me to show up a little bit differently, or in the US, for instance. And being able to kind of sense that and adapt is a key, right? And at the highest levels, there's, even things like spiritual agility. And when I say spiritual, I don't necessarily mean religious, but being able to kind of not just tolerate, but being able to kind of respect and celebrate other traditions is crucial. And when that doesn't exist, it can lead to terrible things. And we have seen that in history.
Right.
And it is really heartbreaking when you see that. And so when I think about like how do you bring in greater peace and harmony versus deep polarization and hatred, I think agility plays an important role.
It's so interesting because I have these conversations also. What's happening in the macro world? You and I are not solving what's happening in the macro world. We're not writing articles, opinion pieces on that, but we're talking to people who are on the ground in organizations, managing and leading people who are affected by all of that. And how do you lead under those circumstances? How do you lead when you have an organization that's split down the middle on a specific world political topic, right? How do you lead that organization? And that's got to be a challenge for the people you working with too, especially when go flying all over the world.
Absolutely. And those can be quite delicate, tricky to manage, and that is where we find that our simple solutions may not be as effective, and we need to be much more adaptive as we think about it.
Absolutely. So when when you were talking, I was thinking about Patrick Lencioni and how he kind of has a hierarchy of healthy teams, and at the base is trust. If you don't have trust, you cannot move up the pyramid. When you're talking about agility and the different topics, cognitive leadership, communication, strategy, is there a hierarchy? Like when you go into an organization, is there a place where you have to start to get a foundation?
Um, Firstly, I'm a big fan of Patrick Lencioni, and I use the 5 dysfunctions for team, or like the cohesive behaviors of a team with all my clients, and to be very honest with you, I haven't gotten there as yet in terms of the framework. I'm working on the book, the Agility Code, and
I
as
know.
part
I'm
of that,
talking
I'm
about
trying to
just
find.
anecdotally. When you walk into an organization, what are you finding the like flashing red light when it comes to the topics you're talking about?
I think so. Companies bring me in a couple of situations, right? One is they're growing really fast, and they want to sustain that growth and maintain it and make sure that they're doing all the right things as they go on the path, right? Or on the other hand, they are concerned about stagnation or stall growth or low growth, and they want to figure out like how to can accelerate growth.
Mm-hmm.
In either of those situations, we always begin by ensuring that there's a really solid foundation, right? So ensuring that they have a clear set of core values, a core purpose, and a unified vision that the team can align around.
So
Where do you want to be 10 years
you're
from now?
so what I hear is that's the foundation. The foundation is, what are the core values? What are we trying to accomplish here? Is everybody rowing in the same direction?
Right. And so, I mean, one of the things I've heard from people is like, when I talk about agility and they say, hey, Sri, so if you're telling me that, I'm going to be agile, like, then anything goes, like nothing sticks. Like there's this very famous line in Hamilton, right? Wherein Hamilton asks Aaron Burr, if you stand for nothing, what will you fall for? If you stand for nothing, what is it all for? And I think that, that line, I think is relevant from this agility perspective, because what actually anchors you is your vision, your aspirations, what is your purpose, and what is your core values, right? And that'll vary from company to company, but each company and the team has to kind of decide what that is important. What are those things for them? And then once they're clear on that, that kind of gives them a framework in which they can be agile and so forth.
Yeah, I like that. Gary Ridge, who was the former CEO of WD-40, he talks about culture and I never like WD-40 is like one of the top companies on the planet to work for. Like the thing that makes your stuff not squeak is one of the best. And he talked about how he lets people make decisions autonomously as long as they understand the values of the company. If they're very clear on the values and the decisions they make are within the values, they have a lot of agility and flexibility to be able to make those decisions. I translated that for me and for my life and for my clients is, if you have a core set of values, it makes decisions much easier, right? If these are my values, this comes in, does it fit into what it is I stated was important? If it doesn't, the values made the decision, and it's much easier. So that's kind of like what you're talking about.
Yeah. The other thing that I really pay attention to is the leader and their leadership capacity and capability. Because many times I feel like, the leader is kind of a lid on a jar, right? They can kind of become the constraint to the growth of the organization. Mm-hmm. And so they have to kind of expand their own leadership capacity and capability, and that then enables others to do the same thing. But they have to kind of be a role model for that. So one of the things I've learned, some of it is the hard way, is like success in coaching kind of comes down to client selection. Right? If you have somebody who is highly coachable, and at the end of the day, a lot of this kind of comes down to their willingness and their desire to evolve their behavior, because a lot of this is around behavior change, then all kinds of things are possible. But if that coachability aspect isn't there, then it feels like you're pushing a rock up a hill. It's not fun.
It is. I've doubled fees on clients, and I've said, look, you really don't value this, so going forward, I'm okay with that, but I'm not okay with it for the fee we're charging right now. If you're going to not listen to what we have to say, I'd rather get paid double. And they sure up pretty quickly. It's interesting because my forte, my favorite is the uncoachable. I like the problem children. I like going toe to toe with someone who says, you're not going to fix me and you're not going to change me. So it's kind of fun when you can actually get through to someone and show them the impact that they're having on the organization, on other people, because most of the time it's unconsciousness, right? They just have no idea that they're completely destroying what, and CEOs also, right? I'm sure you work with CEOs who are the catalyst in their company and also the bottleneck in the company, both at the same time.
Yeah. And I think you kind of hit on that, right? It's basically on consciousness. So if you think about my core purpose, it's to basically grow and develop conscious leaders, cohesive teams, and enduring businesses.
Can you define that for me? What's a conscious leader?
A conscious leader is somebody who has a higher level of self-awareness. They
Mm,
understand themselves well enough to say, they're really good at a couple of things, right? Understanding what do I really, really want? And also, what are the fears that hold me back? So they're really good at presenting themselves to authentic fears.
mm,
And they're really strong on self-regulation versus getting triggered or hijacked or like being a victim to whatever else is going on, right? And also, I feel like the leaders at a higher level of consciousness have recognized that it's not just pure ambition. At the end of the day, it's about service, right? They're moving towards a servant leadership, or what Jim Collins might say, the level 5 leadership, wherein there's a very fierce professional will. They're relentless. They work really hard. They drive really hard, but there's also deep personal humility. They recognize that it's not just about them, right? They're orienting themselves and the organization and the team towards a higher purpose. To me, those are some of the signs of conscious leaders.
when you meet a mature, conscious CEO who's been there, done that, and has reached that state that you're talking about, it's for me, it's always awe-inspiring. And again, I talked about Gary Ridge. When you meet someone like that who's done their personal work, who now sees leadership as a mantle and something that they can do to be of service to the people in their organization, not just the mission of the organization, I always find that breathtaking.
Absolutely. And it's palpable, right? Like it is deeply inspiring and it moves you. And that is a power, like, that's what inspires people to take on, really difficult things and get it done versus like a cult of following, right? Like, which is very different.
You have an assessment for agility, right?
Yeah.
What does it measure? What do you get out of that assessment?
So, I get invited to give talks on this topic about embracing agility. So, for instance, later this month, I'm going to be doing a talk for YPO in Melbourne. And it's a group of CEOs. And in those settings, I have them do an assessment where they answer a bunch of questions on these different dimensions. And they can self-assess where are they in terms of agility, right? Whether so for that talk, for instance, I'm going to be focusing on mindset, leadership, strategy, and relationships, right? These are some of the main things where CEOs need agility. And it helps them understand what are some areas where I'm able to practice agility very well versus what are some areas where I struggle with it. Right. I think when I go through your book, Emerging Leader, you have various, little, what you call attitude adjustment. And I love that, right? Because where you're kind of inviting them to be agile, right? They have a certain way of looking at things, and you're offering a reframe and say, hey, there's another way to look at it, and uh, this might serve you better in terms of where you're trying to get to. Otherwise, what's happening is, their actions are not aligned with the results and their vision. They seem
Right.
to be in conflict, right? What some people might call self-sabotage, right? So, and being able to kind of uncover those things can be really helpful. And many a time, it is around fears that have not been understood or even given light of day, because many of us have an interesting relationship with fear. We think that fear is bad and it needs to be avoided at all costs. And when we do that, they say, well, what you resist persists. They show up in unconscious ways for you, right? And at the most unexpected ways. Because if you think about agility, in fact, it is most important when you're under a lot of pressure and stress. When everything is good, you're probably going to be just fine. But as the pressure builds up, we can get to this place of fight or flight or freeze, right? Which is basically reducing our options. And it's probably, what you might call a primitive brain kind of taking over versus our prefrontal cortex, allowing us to make good, well-informed decisions. And how do you kind of access that more easily is the question. And it's all a matter of practice.
Right. And let's talk about that a little more. I often tell my clients, if I can get you to be grounded and centered, I have to play less whack-a-mole with your behaviors. right? You'll automatically know who to be, how to show up in a given situation. So when everything that you're talking about requires a level of maturity, requires a level of self-regulation and ability to not take the bait and be be here now and figure out what is the next course of action. So what do you share with people to help them build that muscle?
So at the core of that is to, um, what Carl Jung might say, make the unconscious conscious, make the invisible visible, right? There's a set of assumptions um, that are running us that we may not be fully aware of. And until you can take perspective on that, you'll be subject to them versus viewing them as object. Do you know what I mean?
I do,
And
I do, but I want you to go further with it.
so I'll give you a simple example. So, there might be many people who can relate to this when it comes to weight loss, for instance. A few years ago, I was trying to lose some weight, and I kind of knew what I needed to do. I was like, eat healthier, go exercise regularly, reduce the amount of alcohol, get sleep, hydration. You understand all of those things. But when I looked at my actions, they were not aligned with that.
Mm.
I was eating large meals, probably eating large desserts. Although I was like, a member of a nice gym, I wasn't going regularly. I wasn't sticking to any kind of schedule. And I was young. Yeah, I'd just go, drinking with friends, whatever. It wasn't aligned with the goals that I was uh, aspiring for.
Right.
Now, when I tried to unpack what was happening underneath that, there was a set of assumptions which basically said that if I have to make any kind of restrictions on what I eat, that's a lousy life, right? If I have to stick to a regimen and stick to a schedule and be disciplined, that is basically loss of autonomy. That's a lousy life.
Robert
Right?
Keegan calls that a competing commitment.
Exactly, right? So I use a lot of his work, right? I'm a very big fan of Keegan and the immunity change
You,
model.
you and I are
So
such kindred spirits.
and so in that, it's like uncovering that hidden competing commitment, and then basically what is the big fear underneath that big assumption, right? What's the big bad thing that'll happen? It's basically if I become this person who's going to put restrictions on what I eat and eat a lot of salads, or like, go to the gym regularly, like, that's a lousy life. That was the assumption that was running me. Now I'm in a place, if I don't eat salads regularly, I feel yucky.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't go to the gym regularly, I don't feel good. I mean, there are times when I don't go, but I know I'm paying a cost for it. That perspective is completely shifted. And there's no fear about like if I'm, eating, in a healthy way or exercising in a healthy way, that's a lousy life. Now the good life is basically being that way. You see, so there's a shift in the big assumption that was holding me back and what's available to me right now. And what I've
So
noticed is
what shifted that?
it was all a series of experiments, right? There was a time, so when you come from India, you're used to eating big hearty meals. There's a lot of rice and vegetables and, bread and so on and so forth, right? Like when I first came to America in 96, I was at Ohio University, right? And my roommates were all Indian, and we would see these people, Americans who are eating all these leaves, and you're like, what is it? Like, it's like little cows eating like gospels, like grass, like, it didn't make any sense. Like, how could that be a real meal? That was the thought.
Right.
But then I basically set myself a goal of like eating one salad a week, because I never used to eat salads, because it wasn't in the
It
culture that
wasn't
I grew up. That's
right.
not what we did, right? And then you realize like that is amazing. Right now, my daily routine is go to Sweet Green and get a salad for lunch.
Mm. So what I hear you saying is, I'm going to do a solo podcast on this because I follow so many of these leadership guru guys and women who like have these bullet points of how you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to do. Like you have your bullet points of cognitive agility, leadership agility, communication agility, and it gets overwhelming. And what I hear you saying is, right, there's an ideal, there's a target that we're working towards. Now there's incremental changes that we need to make. There's incremental behavior changes, there's incremental consciousness changes, and then there's work we have to do on ourselves. And that there's a, there's a building towards agility. Is that what
Yeah,
you're saying?
absolutely. I think it is something that you have to practice because it is a new way of being.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about that learning curve, right? You go from a state of unconscious incompetence where you don't even know that you're incompetent, and then you come to a state of like conscious incompetence. Now you know that you're
Which
actually
is otherwise known as hell. Like,
right. You're like,
oh
oh
my
my God, I
God, I
can't do
know
that.
I'm not doing a good job.
Oh my God, exactly. Right. And once you process that and you say, okay, I'm going to run some experiments, and you come to conscious competence, wherein you can do it, but it takes quite a bit of effort. And
Right.
then you come to the state of like unconscious competence where you can do it without thinking about it. And a simple example for me is because I go to all these different cities and so forth, places. When I first get to a new place, it's like, oh no, I don't know where anything is. But after a little while, I get used to where the different places are. I get used to the roads and so on and so forth. And I can drive or get around with very little effort. Whereas initially, I had to be totally on and saying, am I going right here? Am I going left there? And so on and so forth. And it's the same thing with behavior change, right? It is not like a switch that you turn on and suddenly, it goes from off to on. That I don't think that doesn't work. I mean,
Right.
sometimes there's a clear epiphany and like it changes, but most of the types of things that we are talking about are not in that fashion.
Because when I go through your stuff, and when I listen, when I listen to you talk, what you're talking about really is personal transformation, right? It's using these leadership challenges, it's using all this to grow as a person, right? You talk about a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, right? It's not a switch that flips, it's catching yourself being that fixed victim person and saying, oh wait, I didn't even know before I had a choice to do something different, now I do. And that's when you come in and you show people like there's a different way of doing things.
Yeah, I mean, just take that whole mindset topic, right? I mean, I'm a big fan of Carol Dweck's work, the book Mindset, where she talks about there's these two, kind of mindsets. There's a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And a fixed mindset, you kind of believe that you've been dealt a hand, you have a certain, level of intelligence and capability, and it's kind of set. And in the growth mindset, you're like, you can actually grow your abilities with practice, right? With effort. And the fundamental difference between the fixed mindset and the growth mindset is orientation around failure. Because in the fixed mindset, failure is something that is unacceptable and has to be avoided at all costs. Because if you fail, it then exposes your incompetence, right? Which can be quite tricky. And here's what I've found. Many of the people that I see who have the fixed mindset are super high achievers, really smart, top of their class, have been very successful. And because they've not really experienced a lot of failure is too scary for them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so there's an element of like, I always have to be amazing. I always have to be fantastic. There's no room for error. They might give grace to other people making mistakes, but they can't extend that to themselves. And that's where I think some of the work around self-compassion comes into play. Right? But also for many of them, they haven't really fully uncovered some of the fears that they have around that stuff. Because it is just taken as, hey, of course, it's, best to be perfect and, fantastic and amazing. Like, why is there a debate around that? But it can show up in ways that are maladaptive and affect not just you, but people around you, on your team, in the organization, in your families, and so on and so forth. Right? That is an element of like high performance being run from an unconscious state. Now, in the growth mindset, failure is seen very differently, and failure is essentially seen as an opportunity to learn. Again, we're not talking about failure because somebody was lazy or wasn't trying or whatever, but sometimes you go and try some things and you fail at it in spite of your best intentions. How do you talk to yourself at that point is a question, right? And many of us know that some of the language that we use to talk to ourselves is worse than anything that we would use with anybody else. But that's the way we've kind of used to motivate ourselves,
I have to
right?
remind myself of that. Like, I'm always doing new things, and I'm still afraid of failure. And I have to remind myself that I'm not going to die if I fail. Like a lot of the stuff, like we both put videos on LinkedIn and we put things out in the world, and we fail publicly, right? And and so it's not like oh, automatically I'm just going to risk and I'm going to be okay with failure. It's getting your nervous system used to, oh look, I didn't die, oh look, I didn't die again, like,
Right.
and I can lean into this.
Yeah. And I lived in Thailand, right, from 14 to 17. And at that point, my personal trainer, Ramin, took me to a couple of Muay Thai fights because one of his friends was in it. And so these would be like these, big events and different age range, people would fight. And there's this one fight, like there's this 9-year-old girl. She's fighting this 11-year-old girl. And she's like demolishing the 11-year-old. And I'm just sitting there like thinking, oh my God, like I do not want to be in there. And I was like, how does this person able to take what seems like extremely painful hits and deliver it? And if you think about how Muay Thai fighters train, they will, kick and kick and kick and punch and all that stuff. And as a result of that, some of the nerve endings that they have are actually, they don't cause you as much pain because in a way they're gone, right? It's training that allows you to actually take on that kind of pain, if you want to think about it, because it isn't as painful. If somebody has never done it and you see that, you're like, I would never survive. If somebody hit me like that, I'd die. But that's not true. Right? But it is a matter of training. And they didn't become like that overnight. They must have started training when they were 3 or something. I don't know. But the same types of things are necessary for us to do in other areas. Right. And again, I see high performers who are able to brace for failure in certain arenas, and it's fine. It doesn't scare them. But in other arenas, it's like, no way. And so as coaches, we have the opportunity to kind of help them take perspective on a lot of these things. Right. And kind of create that place, not just a safe space, but a brave space where they can take those risks and try out some new things and recognize that they'll survive. I mean, a few years ago, actually, there must be a recording of this on a coaching platform. My coach, Amanda Blake, who wrote the book Your Body's Your Brain, had me. She was doing some event for a large gathering, and she said, "Can you come on as a client and we'll do a live session?" And one of the things I brought up there was like, Mandy, I want to create videos, but I'm really scared about doing it. And the fear was I'll put something out there and it's going to live there in perpetuity and people will see it and they'll judge me, they'll ridicule me, it'll be really bad. And so, and she kind of helped me kind of test all those fears to say, is it really as bad as you think it is? Right? And will you be able to survive this or not? I was like, yeah, I can. And then from then is when I started, publishing some videos. And even now when I go, this morning I published some video. I was like, oh my God, people are going to hate this. Like, I mean, it's just a fear, but I also have enough evidence to know that, I've done it in a very sincere fashion with a motive to serve. And there's going to be some people who will benefit from it and some people may not. And it's okay. I don't have to please everyone. It's like I can offer to the world what I have. And it's their choice to either accept it or do what they want to do with it.
But that statement is that statement was hard won, right? That wasn't what you walked in with. You didn't walk in with, I'm just going to put my thing out in the world and people can take it and leave it. You worked with it. You worked with your nervous system. You tested it. You found out you weren't going to live. And that's one of the reasons why I really, really like you as a coach and someone who shares this information, because you share the ideal, you share the vision of where we want to go, and you acknowledge the humanity it takes to get there. And I think that's the way people can learn.
Yeah. And I also feel like, as coaches, we are role modeling a lot of the behavior for our clients as well. Right. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I still remember, so 10 years ago is when I did the Georgetown Leadership Coaching Program. And so we had just moved to Bangkok in August of 14. And starting in September, I used to fly back once a month from Thailand to DC to do the program.
Wow.
It's 7 months, right? And I remember sitting in those training sessions and saying, I can never ask these questions. These people seem just like brilliant and from a different planet where, like, they're in a conversation, then they ask the perfect question. Like, I will never be able to do this. And one of the best things that they did for us in that training program was on the first day, they said, open your diary. And on one side, they said, I'm a great coach. Another one, I said, I'm learning to be a good coach. And they were like, hold that.
Mhm.
Both of those things are true. And it was a good reminder for us, right? Like, you have some skills, you're doing it with your best ability, but there's always room to grow and develop.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So we're going to put all your links in the show notes. But if people want, so that assessment that you have, if we put the link in the show notes for that agility assessment, was that do good for people who aren't in the middle of being coached by you?
Yeah, I'll definitely provide that link. I think it'll be a good, assessment for people to take. It just takes a few minutes and they get some information from it. And then, once the book comes out, I think there'll be more resources coming. And they can always get in touch with me. And if there's ever anything I can do to be of help, that'll be great. If they want to follow, my YouTube channel, there's a lot of resources there. And then there's more to come.
Will you come back on the show when the book is published?
Absolutely. Anytime.
That'll be amazing because I'd love it. I think this is a great topic, and I want to continue our conversation. So thank you for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom and your experience.
Mark, thank you so very much. This has been such a pleasure speaking with you about this topic, and I'm very grateful to you for having me as a guest. Thank you for that.
No, it's a pleasure. To everybody else, I hope you get from this show week after week that we're all good. We're all doing great. We're all looking for something better. We're all looking to improve. We're all looking to grow, and it's an incremental thing. It's practices, and it's like 1% better every day. I love you a ton. Have a great rest of the day.